But an African born in this country and educated in this system
becomes retarded like this system. Becomes retarded like the system.
So we have teenagers, 14, 15, 16, having babies that are not the kind of adults that you're talking about.
Right, but it's because we've created an anachronism. So we have people with these kind of bodies that are operating in a whole different space and time because of our ignorance of who we're raising. So now we really understand the importance of rites of passage, which is now we understand why they got taken off at 7 or 8 years old and were taken out of the villages and things and went through a whole bunch of stuff. So that by the time they figured out how to hunt or whatever they were going to do, etc., and they had to prove themselves, and then they had to come back and demonstrate to the community that they were ready to take their place, then that's why they had marriage rights and a whole bunch of other stuff. Because we didn't have no social services and folks begging and all that kind of stuff in Africa. We did a whole bunch of other stuff we didn't have no business, but that, no, we didn't have to deal with. Okay, but they understood the importance of it. They at least understood who they were. And they understood the capacity that they had, and they were willing to download the information. You know, it was interesting. Just last year I was at a conference at U of M, and they were talking about stress urinary incontinence. And so the European doctor gets up and talks about bladder control and function, and he talks about the fact that in Africa, he couldn't believe it, but he saw with his own eyes, that the children are able to be trained at 6 months. Toilet trained at 6 months old. He said he couldn't even believe it. Was incredible. So he took pictures of the whole procedure as to how the African mothers train the babies to be potty trained at 6 months. I mean, it was like, I loved it, because then that answered to me why they was going around with no diapers. Because I could not understand how come there wasn't feces and urine running down these women's sides. But these babies were potty trained at 6 years old, so they didn't need no diapers and things. I mean, 6 months old. So they didn't need any diapers. And then he went on to say that we cannot do that, that we are not neurologically capable of controlling our bladders until we are 2 years old. Now, so therefore, now what does that say to you as an African mother? Now, you have a child that you have sent already into retardation because he has complete neurologic control at 6 months, and you're up here not training him and awakening up those centers in his brain, etc., until he's 2 years old.
And unfortunately, black families try to take the white families as a model, and they seem to want to have their children be like white children.
Well, I mean, this is the whole legacy that we're looking at. It comes from what? Lack of gratitude.
Lack of knowledge about who you are.
Yeah, but see, even if you appreciated who you are, I think that you would be willing to want to get up on the information, because you could obviously see that there was a difference. And so I'm saying that the lack of information is just another symptom of the real crime of lack of appreciation of self. Okay, and there are deeper symptoms of that. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's like when you truly love yourself, there's a point that you get to that you just basically have to dismiss stuff. You might not have the information, but you intuitively know it's wrong, and you will not do it for you. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, ma'am.
When you were discussing the African woman who had a child at 14, is that one of the things that creates the cultural damage for women who have hysterectomy?
Well, no, but it does go into issues, again, with genetic encoding, okay, because like the axology or the value system is different. And again, when you try to now actualize a foreign value system that is chemically alien, okay, to the chemistry that you already have on board, okay, you create problems. Because see, there's something I didn't tell you about, and you need to understand that so you can understand what's happening. And this was phenomenal. But there's something known, oh good, it's right up here. There's something known as morphic resonance. What they call causative, no, it's called formative causation. Okay, so Rupert Sheldrake uses the term formative causation, and morphic resonance is used by Fred Alan Wolf. But these are two integral physicists. And what they talk about is the fact that, and it goes back to our electromagnetic spectrum, they were very curious about why is it that when we see flocks of birds or schools of fish, that they automatically know how to turn left or right and not crash into each other. But to their visual perception, they're not talking, as they understand talking. Okay, there's no sign that they send out that says turn left or turn right. There's no arrow out there, you know, and they just are doing all this and nobody's crashing anybody else. Okay, so it's like, you know, why are they all landing or going up or down at the same time? And they're like, well, you know, we have to find this. So it's kind of like the, you know, Newton's apple story. And so they did some interesting observations. And so in Australia, you know, they have an area called the outback. And it's like really interesting because nature manicures that area by setting it on fire. And so when things get out of hand, then nature sets itself on fire, the brush, and it burns 100,000 acres and that dies out, and then it recolonizes itself. So in the outbacks, they have these huge bushfires, but what happens is it causes the animals to have to then do migration. Okay, so these animals, because of this one vast bushfire, these little birds called tits, T-I-T-S, were forced into the cities. And so what happened is that this one area, because the normal plants and insects and things that they normally eat obviously were destroyed or had to move on because of the fires, a bird figured out how to open a milk bottle and suck the milk out. So they thought that was very interesting because after 1 week, all the birds were attacking the milk bottles and sucking it out. And then they started actually logging in the times and the sightings over Australia as to when all the birds of the same species started doing the same thing. So these are little teeny weeny birds like little finches, you know, and they don't fly for very, very long distances. So it was like, how is it 1,000 miles away, within 5 months, the same species of bird now is actually opening milk bottles in this area? It was the same entity with the fish. How do they know how to turn right and left, etc.? And especially now, since we know that these birds are not communicating, not 1,000 miles away. There's a particular moth, for example, that grows in South America. A huge thing. It's about big as my palm of my hand. And it has to fly over 1,000 miles to mate. So it's an interesting mating cycle because the females go and they lay the eggs way, way away, and then they have to actually fly back to this one bush to mate. And it's really interesting that they don't mess with any other species of animal, or butterfly, or moth, whatever it is, etc. And at this time of year, they all fly back to this one bush, and it's the only bush that they mate on. So the women get there first, the females, and then the men come and they mate. And their thing is that we don't understand this because it's like, well, what makes the men get here first? I mean, the men get here. You know, is it some kind of aroma that the women send out? And it's, how do they smell it for 1,000 miles? You know, these are the questions that they ask. Well, what they figured out is that there is a frequency of sound, which is a form of light, or something that basically we can't pick up with our ears, eyes, nose, etc., that these animals are able to communicate with each other just because they have the same like structure. So wherever they are on the planet, they can communicate with themselves and exchange information. So they call it the 100th monkey theory, is the common name for it. 100th monkey theory. So if you pay attention, we see that in ourselves because we have sisters and brothers here who dress in culture. They know how to play the drums. They can put the gailies on. I mean, they got all the language and the names and whatever else. And it's like, well, you know, when have you been home? Never. Never been to Africa. Never, ever been to Africa. And we know that there are no books that's going to teach you drumming and all this other stuff. So it's like, now how are you, you know, Miss Africa of 1993 and you've never been home? How is this? The same thing. Because all of the sisters and brothers who have the same genetic makeup as ourselves, when they are willing to actually live out the information that is inculcated in their genes, it's like radar that's sent out so that whoever else has the same gene structure, their genes are automatically activated. So that means then that wherever my sisters and brothers are on the planet, I will always have a natural, innate tendency to act out whatever they are doing unless I consciously inhibit myself. And that's how we then start getting into diseases. And it also works the opposite way, which is why, you know, the sisters and brothers over there are acting crazy because we're now radiating this stuff over here, and they're picking it up in their gene pool and acting it out. And it is called morphic resonance. So anything that is like me automatically is going to basically be informed, and if they allow themselves to, will spontaneously act out my behavior.